Today I want to go over something that I think is one of the most important parts of the therapeutic relationship, and I'm speaking mostly to therapists, to counselors at this point, but a lot of the principles will apply even in business as you're working with potential clients for sales and things like that. But for counseling, it's particularly important. This is one of the very first things that I teach to my clinical supervisees, to make sure that they have this as a foundation in working with clients. And what it's about is the very first session, the very first time that you sit down with a client and you meet them. Up to this point, they don't know anything about you. They might know a little bit about the company and a little bit about counseling in general, but it's your interaction with them that's going to set the tone for all of the work that you're going to do together. And depending on how you set this tone, how you're able to build rapport with that client, is going to really determine whether you have a weak, slow start and have very little impact, or whether you launch right into working on some issues, building trust, and moving forward. There's a lot of research out there, and you feel free to look it up. But when it comes to different therapy techniques, primarily they're about the same level of effectiveness. But there's one technique in particular that is the most powerful, and I may talk about this a little more in another video, but this is it in a nutshell, and it's building the relationship. Because the relationship and the quality of the relationship between the counselor and the client is the number one determining factor of success. So everything else is just kind of tools that are added to that to make that happen. But the most important thing is the relationship between the two of you, and that is built in the very first session with the very first impression. So I want to give you 14 tips, 14 things that you can do to build that relationship and get off to a stunning start. Number one, the first thing is let them talk. A lot of times therapists want to get into jumping right into the issue and working on the problem. Maybe you didn't do the assessment, you've read the assessment, and you're actually going to work with them, and you've got some ideas about things to do. But here's the thing, especially if you weren't the one that did the assessment, and even if you were, the most important part is really building the relationship in the beginning. And the way to do that is to let them talk. And as a rule, I think at a minimum for this first session, the client should be speaking 80% of the time, possibly more. Now, you might have to ask a few questions or do a little bit of redirection, but for the most part, you're letting them share because they're bringing you up to speed on their life. Part of this is, I think a lot of therapists will need to resist the urge to insert ourselves, to fix something, to jump in and do an intervention. Don't do that. In fact, there should be very little therapy done in the very first session other than building of the therapeutic alliance. That's your primary goal. So slow down and just let it happen. Let them see who you are. Show them your heart and get to know theirs. The second thing, number two, is to use your records. Now, a lot of times, for example, I mentioned a moment ago, someone else did the assessment and they were referred to you. So you'll have the document that has their diagnosis, that has the presenting issue, the reason that they're coming to counseling. And so that's very important to review. Obviously, you should be doing that. But sometimes you have additional sources of information, additional records. And if you don't, you can do a little searching and you can find that. I would definitely do this legwork before the client comes in. You can get collateral reports. So from things like maybe a police report, might be something from a social worker or from another therapist that they've worked with, other medical records. It could be statements from the family. So things that you can gather to get a complete picture, because the client most often is not going to tell you everything, simply because it's very difficult to give a complete picture all in one session, but also because there's some things that they might not want to share. So they might be minimizing the problem, or they might be just so blown away by the severity of the symptoms that they're not able to articulate everything clearly. So use your records, use whatever you have available, and make sure you do your preparation before you meet with them. Okay, number three, ask a lot of questions. Ask. Who, what, when, where, why, how. Repeat it over and over again. You want to dig deeper. And sometimes a client will talk about something and you'll have some questions about that, and they'll mention something else and they'll go over here. And so you may end up asking questions about something that they've said, just in the moment. But remember those things that they said that you kind of went past, especially things that get glazed over really quickly, because those are things you want to go back to and ask more questions about. Dig and dig and dig. Sometimes it's repeating the same question just with different wording. You'd be surprised how often you get a different answer or additional information. Another thing that you want to do beyond just gathering information for diagnostic purposes or for better understanding is to normalize experiences. And what I mean by that is sometimes, think about something that was very painful or very embarrassing to you. That's difficult to share. And especially if you're sitting down with someone you've never met before, and this is your very first time meeting them, it's going to be especially hard to share those things. And so you may try to be guarded or to sugarcoat. But as a therapist, you should be able to normalize that experience. Whether that is addiction, they may not want to talk about how bad that their addiction is. Or maybe it's a guilt that they're feeling or a sense of hopelessness. Normalize it. We may not have the same experiences that they have. We may not have walked in their shoes and done the same things, but we all have experienced the same emotions. At some point or other, we know what it's like to feel hopelessness, or to feel guilty about something, or to feel like an area of our life is out of our control. Normalize that, and that will help the client to share it without a higher level of apprehension, and you're going to get a better quality of information that way as well, and it's going to put them at ease. They're going to feel like you care, and which is what you should be doing, and so this is a way of showing that, normalizing it. Number 5, take notes. This kind of goes without saying, but I would suggest that you let the client know that what they're sharing with you is important enough for you to record. So I'll typically just say, hey, this is really interesting, what you're sharing with me. I want to make sure that I don't forget anything. Is it cool if I take notes? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh yeah, no problem. Actually, I've never had a client say, no, don't take notes. It actually reinforces the fact that you're underscoring what they're saying is important enough for you to write it down. And that helps them to feel heard. Number 6, don't push too far, too fast. Sometimes when a client's talking, they will get reluctant or they'll get hesitant, and there's a temptation there to say, oh, we've got our finger on a hot button topic. Let's really push into this and get the client to talk about it. Don't. There will be a time and a place to discuss those things, but if the client feels reluctant or if the client feels hesitant, then I would respect that and kind of back off, let them direct the conversation to where they want, or you redirect the conversation. Another thing to do is to ask permission, to say, I recognize that you seem kind of uncomfortable talking about this. Is it okay if I ask a question about whatever? And that's going to help them to feel validated and to feel empowered because they're able to give permission. And that kind of opens up some of those barriers and some of those doors as well. And then another thing to remember is that clients will never share everything all at once. Sometimes things that are actually very important will only come out much later, once trust is established. So don't push too hard into those issues, they'll come. Number 7, practice what I call detached empathy. What that means is that's about your tone, how you present yourself, how you come across to the client. Now, you definitely want to be sincerely compassionate. That's a must. But you also have to be in control. And so what that means is that you don't come across as consumed or overwhelmed by what the client is sharing with you. If you've got the face while you're in session with them, well, then they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm a mess. He ain't even able to help me. So you need to make sure that your tone is compassionate, but that you stay under control, that you have a confidence that lets them know that you know the solutions to their problems, and that basically you're not freaked out by what they're sharing. All right, number 8, don't assume anything. Every person that walks into your office, there are some commonalities, but there are differences as well. So don't assume anything. Seek clarification. Recap what they said. State it back to them. So what I'm hearing is blah, blah, blah. Is that right? And sometimes you'd be surprised how often they'll say, no, actually, and they'll give a little different perspective on it, or a different take, or maybe something that you didn't hear quite right, or you assumed. You interpreted something out of what they were saying that isn't really the facts. So always take that time, to recap and to verify. Information both on what they're sharing on an informational level, on a fact level, but also on an emotional level. You want to make sure you understand the feeling that they're having as well. So don't be shy. Ask some tough questions. All right, number 9. Listen to the silence. It makes a difference. Sometimes what a client doesn't say is more important than what they do say. So those moments when things aren't being shared or when there's a lapse in silence, it's okay to sit with that. That might reveal something very profound, and it might give you an ability to have some insight into something that maybe even the client is struggling with understanding. Okay, number 10, roll with resistance. Now, resistance is something that we're all going to encounter, and we all do ourselves, and we experience from our clients. When resistance occurs, it can come in a lot of different forms. It might be silence, like we were talking about, where they just shut down and they don't talk, or it might be they become very angry and very raise their voice and become very agitated, or they might be harsh or object or say, like, I'm court ordered to be here, I don't want to be here, shut up, I wish you weren't even talking to me, get out of my face. Fine. Meet them right there. Don't try to overpower resistance and overcome them and change their mind and make them want to be in the session. Whatever the reason might be, or if it's resistance to a particular topic, whatever, validate that experience, accept it, and sit with them in it. Say, I understand that you're really upset with being here. Tell me why. Oh, well, Oh, yeah, I get it. I would probably be upset too. And you meet them right there, and you roll with that resistance, and it becomes a way to better understand their pain and what's really happening. Okay, number 11, find points of common interest. So this is where, as a therapist, you want to use appropriate self-disclosure. Obviously, you don't want the client to be counseling you, so you're not sharing a lot of your life story. But there are times that something that you can relate to, if it's appropriate to the session, it's important to share those things, or to have humor, to crack a joke, or make light of yourself, or whatever it might be, a way to find an inroad and connect. Telling those stories to elicit a connection will foster them sharing more, and that's going to lead to a much better relationship overall. So number 12, show love. I'm going to repeat that again. Show love. That's what they need. That's what relationships are all about. We're not usually in relationships with people that hate us or that we hate, right? You shouldn't hate anybody, but we do. So you don't want, within the therapeutic relationship, for there to be antagonism and for there to be any kind of harshness. You want to come across very clearly as someone that cares about them and that loves them, again, in an appropriate way. You are less of a mechanic than a mirror of compassion. And so you're showing them things about themselves, and they're discovering it with you as you discover it. So first, understand the frustration, to use the car analogy. Understand their frustration of being broken down on the side of the road. Do that first, before you start replacing parts and tightening bolts. Number 13, I'm out of fingers here. 13, build a story. So remember that this isn't merely a problem that you're addressing. It's not just something to diagnose, recognize the treatment for, use the interventions, boom, we're done, see you later. What you're doing is you are addressing a life. And this is someone's experiences that they've gone through. And so you need to build the story so that you can correctly understand what's happening in their life. If you don't understand the story, you can't help the person. I don't care how good your interventions are. You have to know the person and build the story. And lastly, number 14 is build an alliance. This is where we get into the term, therapeutic alliance. I always like to make a point to tell the client that this is collaborative. This isn't me fixing you, waving my magic therapy wand, and then you're done, and I'm the expert, and you shut up and just do what I say. They're the expert on them. They know more about their life than they'll ever know. Yet, to the table, I bring some experiences and some tools and some skills. And so putting those two things together, we're going to be far more effective than either of us could be trying to do it on our own. So I want to build a team. And so as part of that, as you're sharing your action plan, as you're saying, hey, here's the goals that I think would be helpful. Here's the things that I think we need to work on. Do that with your client. Elicit their feedback and get their agreement. Make sure that this is something that they're willing to do and that the two of you are striving together for it. So there's 14 ways, 14, to build up rapport within the relationship, and it's one of the most important things you can do of anything within especially the first session, but any session going on. And by the way, it's not a one-time thing. You continually do that. So I hope that was helpful. Until next time, don't just be transformed, be kinged.